It began like any other taping day, the hum of lights, the clatter of crew, the sound of laughter rolling through the Family Feud studio. Steve Harvey stood center stage, sharp in a charcoal gray suit, his tie knotted just right, his usual confidence glowing beneath the golden studio lights. The audience was electric, families smiling, cameras ready. But somewhere in that crowd was a stillness, a presence that hadn't yet made itself known. That day, he was told one of the contestant families had traveled from overseas. From Ukraine, the producer had said. Refugees now. The little girl on the team, she's special. Steve smiled at first, assuming special meant funny or precocious, like so many kids who came on the show. But as the minutes ticked closer to filming, he noticed the way that little girl stood at her podium. Small frame, auburn hair tied with a yellow ribbon, hands clasped nervously in front of her. There was something in her eyes, a kind of brightness that wasn't about the lights, but about survival. When the cameras rolled, laughter came easy. The game began. The families teased each other. The buzzer rang again and again. But as the round ended and Steve leaned over to talk with the young contestant, he felt something shift. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked, crouching a little so he wouldn't tower over her. "Diana," she said softly. Her accent was delicate, her English careful. "That's a beautiful name," Steve said. "How old are you, Diana?" 10, she said, smiling faintly. The audience chuckled warmly, and Steve grinned back. But there was something about her poise, the way she spoke like someone much older. He asked, "So what do you do for fun? You play sports? You draw? You got hobbies?" Diana hesitated, glancing toward her mother, who stood beside her, a woman with tired eyes but a proud smile. "I make videos," she said finally. Steve nodded. "Oh, you one of those YouTubers, huh? You making content?" The crowd laughed again, but Diana simply nodded. "Yes, but I don't do it for me." Steve tilted his head slightly. "You don't? Then who's it for?" She looked down for a moment, then back up, her voice trembling but clear enough for every microphone in the room to capture. "For the children who lost their homes. In my country." Steve blinked. "Wait, what'd you say?" Diana swallowed hard. "When the war started, my school closed. Many of my friends left our village. Some lost their homes. I wanted to help. So I made videos with my toys and games. People watched, and I got money from the ads. I gave it to the families, so they can buy food, so they can feel safe." Her mother placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. The entire audience sat frozen, their faces softening. Steve stared at her, speechless for the first time that day. He tried to speak, but his throat tightened. The only sound in the room was the hum of the overhead lights and the faint creak of someone shifting in their seat. Finally, he asked, voice low, "You mean to tell me you're 10 years old and you raised money for other kids?" Diana nodded. "Yes, because I still have my family. Some of them don't." A long, deep silence filled the space between them. Steve exhaled slowly, taking a step back. "Lord have mercy," he whispered under his breath, though the mic caught it just enough for the front row to hear. He turned toward the audience, then back to Diana. "You, sweetheart, you just taught everybody in this room something today." He straightened, but his voice trembled now, barely holding together the weight of what he'd just heard. "We out here arguing over prizes and money, and this little girl out here rebuilding a village." The crowd rose slowly, then fully, into a standing ovation. But it wasn't loud, not at first. It was soft, reverent, as though the applause itself was trying not to break the fragile beauty of that moment. Steve turned to his producer. "Hold up. Cut the music. Stop everything." The room went quiet again. Cameras froze. The lights dimmed slightly as he walked back to Diana's podium. He crouched again, looking her in the eye. "Baby girl," he said softly, "you got more heart than most grown folks I know. Don't you ever forget that." Diana smiled shyly, but her eyes shimmered. "I just wanted to help," she whispered. And Steve, a man known for humor, for strength, for never losing composure, felt his chest tighten. He stood up slowly, exhaled, and looked toward the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice breaking just slightly. "This little girl right here just reminded us all what it means to be human." The applause swelled again, louder this time, no longer restrained, a sound not of entertainment, but of gratitude. And for the first time in Family Feud history, Steve Harvey walked off stage not because of laughter, not because of exhaustion, but because he needed a moment to breathe. Behind the curtain, away from the lights, he pressed a hand over his heart and whispered, "Lord, you still send in angels, huh? Just smaller now." The studio remained suspended in silence. That kind of silence that feels alive, thick with emotion, pulsing with something sacred. The producers exchanged glances, unsure whether to roll again or let the moment breathe. Steve hadn't returned to the stage yet. The cameras stayed idle. Even the audience, who moments before had been laughing and cheering, now sat still, clutching tissues, whispering to one another about the little girl from Ukraine. Behind the curtain, Steve Harvey leaned against the wall, breathing slowly, his chest rising and falling like he was trying to steady a storm inside him. The floor manager approached quietly. "You okay, Mr. Harvey?" He nodded, eyes still wet. "Yeah, just give me a second." He looked down at his hands. He'd hosted thousands of families, seen moments of joy, heartbreak, even miracles on that stage. But something about Diana was different. It wasn't just her story, it was the light in her eyes when she spoke of giving everything away. A 10-year-old who had turned a war into an act of love. Steve wiped his face, took a deep breath, and whispered, "All right, let's finish this right." When he stepped back onto the stage, the audience rose again. He waved gently for them to sit, but his smile was soft now, not his usual showman grin, but something deeply human. "Y'all," he said, voice still trembling slightly, "I've been doing this a long time. I've seen a lot of families come through here. But today—" He paused, pressing a hand to his chest. "Today I met a miracle." He turned toward Diana, who stood shyly at her podium, holding her mother's hand. The blue and gold Family Feud lights shimmered behind her, framing her like a halo. "Sweetheart," Steve continued, "I want to ask you something. When you were making those videos, when you were helping those kids, what made you think of that? Most kids your age just want to play." Diana tilted her head, her voice delicate yet steady. "Because I saw people crying, and I thought maybe if I can make people smile, even a little, they won't feel so alone." That line broke him. He closed his eyes briefly, lowering his head. The crowd erupted into another round of applause, softer this time, the kind filled with tears and respect. When the noise settled, Steve crouched again beside her. "You know, baby, I spend my days trying to lift folks up through laughter, through love, whatever way I can. But today, you lifted me." Her mother, standing beside her, pressed a hand to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes. Steve gestured to her. "Ma'am, can I just say, you raised one incredible little girl." The mother nodded, her voice breaking. "We didn't have much left, Mr. Harvey. But she gave us purpose again." For a moment, the studio forgot it was a set. It felt like a sanctuary not made of pews and stained glass, but of light, cameras, and the collective heartbeat of strangers who suddenly realized they were witnessing something holy. Steve stood again and turned to the crowd. "See, this right here, this is what the world forgets sometimes. You can have nothing, lose everything, and still find something in your heart to give." He pointed to Diana. "This child. She didn't wait for permission to do good. She just did it. And I think if every grown person watching this did the same, maybe the world would look a little different right now." The applause grew again, louder, stronger waves of emotion rolling across the studio. The cameramen had tears in their eyes. The sound technician wiped his face discreetly behind the booth. And Diana, she didn't fidget, didn't hide. She just stood there, smiling, her small hands gripping the podium like it anchored her to the earth. Steve looked at her again. "You know what I think, sweetheart? I think the good Lord sent you here today not for this show, not for the prize, but for all of us." Diana looked up. "To remind you of love?" The crowd was silent again, as if afraid to breathe. Steve turned, motioned to the stage manager, and said quietly, "Cut to commercial, we need a moment." But even during the break, no one moved. The audience stayed seated. People whispered prayers. A woman in the front row held her husband's hand and whispered, "That little girl just gave me hope again." Backstage, Steve sat down on a stool, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. 10 years old, he murmured, and already understanding more about love than most of us ever will. Dana, the producer, crouched beside him. "She reminded you of something, didn't she?" He nodded. "Yeah, of what this world's supposed to feel like." When the cameras rolled again, Steve walked back out, not as a host, but as a man changed. He didn't need cue cards, didn't need jokes. He looked straight into the lens and said, "Wherever you are in the world tonight, remember this little girl's heart. Remember what kindness looks like when it's pure." And across the studio, from the crew to the families on stage, people rose once more, not for a celebrity, but for a child who reminded them of what still mattered. When the cameras faded to black that night, no one wanted to leave. The audience stayed seated, as if the air itself still held the weight of what had happened. There were no jokes, no closing music, just quiet tears, soft applause, and an unspoken understanding that they had witnessed something far greater than a game show. Backstage, Steve Harvey sat in his dressing room with the door half open. The laughter from the studio was gone now, replaced by the faint hum of stage lights cooling above him. His tie was loosened, his shoulders heavy, but his eyes, those warm, soulful eyes, were wide with reflection. He'd seen so much in his lifetime, so many faces, so many stories. But there was something about that little girl, Diana, that he couldn't shake. Dana, his producer, entered quietly, holding a tissue in one hand and a piece of paper in the other. "Steve," she said softly, "we just got something you need to see." He looked up. "What's that?" "It's from her mother. She wanted you to have this before they leave for their flight tonight." Dana handed him a folded note written on pale blue paper. Steve opened it gently, his large hands moving with surprising care. The handwriting was neat, slightly uneven, written by someone for whom English was still a tender language. "Mr. Harvey, thank you for listening to my daughter today. She has seen things no child should see. She lost her school, her friends, her home, but she never lost her kindness. You reminded her that what she does matters, that love, even small, is powerful. We are returning to Europe soon to continue helping other families. Please know you have made her believe again that good people still exist in this world. With gratitude, Alina and Diana." Steve read it once, then again, slower the second time. His lips parted slightly, and his chest rose with a deep breath he didn't release for several seconds. He placed the letter down and rubbed his temples. "Man," he whispered, "God keeps sending me reminders when I least expect 'em." He stood and walked to the mirror, the same one he faced before every show, and caught his reflection. His eyes were red, his expression raw, stripped of performance. "You can tell jokes, make people laugh all day long," he murmured. "But this right here, this is the real work." Meanwhile, outside the studio doors, Diana and her mother were quietly saying goodbye to the crew. A few people hugged them, slipping small notes or bracelets into Diana's hand, tokens of love from strangers whose hearts she had changed. Steve caught them just as they were about to leave. "Hold up," he said, jogging toward them. He carried something in his hand, a small velvet pouch. "Sweetheart," he said, kneeling to meet Diana at eye level again, "I got something for you." He opened the pouch and pulled out a delicate golden pendant in the shape of a heart. Inside, etched so small it was barely visible, were the words, "Keep shining." Diana's eyes widened. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Steve smiled gently. "So are you. You remind the world what hope looks like." Her mother covered her mouth, tears welling up again. Steve placed the pendant in Diana's hand. "You keep doing what you're doing, all right? You keep helping people. Don't ever let the world make you forget who you are." Diana looked up at him, her small hand curling around the pendant. "I won't, Mr. Harvey. And I'll keep making videos. For the kids. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, the seasoned man who'd seen the world's chaos and the child who had chosen to heal it. When they finally left, Steve stood watching as the studio doors closed behind them. The stage lights had been turned off, leaving only the faint glow from the emergency signs. The soundstage felt larger, emptier, yet somehow filled with meaning. He walked slowly back to the podium, running his hand over the buzzer, as if it held the energy of what had just happened. Then he looked up toward the rafters and whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for letting me meet that little girl today." He turned to leave, but before he did, he stopped and glanced at the Family Feud logo, glowing faintly in the background. "You know," he said softly to himself, "some days, this ain't just a show. It's a sermon." That night, Steve went home quieter than usual. No phone calls, no music, no TV, just silence the kind that lets you think. He sat on his back porch, staring up at the night sky. Somewhere, thousands of miles away, a 10-year-old girl was probably doing the same, dreaming about rebuilding a home, about helping children smile again. He thought about the courage it takes to give when you have almost nothing, and how, somehow, the smallest acts of love can echo the loudest. And in that still moment, under the wide Georgia sky, Steve Harvey whispered words meant not for the cameras, not for fame, but for truth itself. God bless the hearts that heal this world one little girl at a time. The next morning, sunlight poured through the tall windows of the studio lobby, glinting off the chrome letters that spelled Family Feud. The air felt different, lighter somehow, though no one could quite explain why. Maybe it was because of the way people spoke in hushed tones that morning, still remembering the day before. Maybe it was because of that little girl named Diana, whose kindness had quietly rearranged everyone's understanding of what mattered. When Steve Harvey arrived on set, the crew greeted him with quiet smiles. Someone had placed a bouquet of yellow and blue flowers, the colors of the Ukrainian flag, on his podium. No one claimed responsibility. It didn't need to be said. They all knew why it was there. Steve stopped in front of the flowers, hands in his pockets, and exhaled. "You feel that?" he said softly to Dana, his producer, who stood beside him. She nodded. "It's like the studio's still carrying her spirit." Steve smiled faintly. "That's 'cause it is." As they began preparing for the next taping, he found himself distracted every time the laughter started. Every time the music played, he could see her again. That small, brave smile, that trembling voice saying, "I just wanted people to feel safe." It haunted him, not painfully, but beautifully. During lunch, Steve sat alone at one of the long tables backstage. His phone buzzed with messages, interviews, requests, schedules, but his mind wasn't there. He opened his notes app and began typing slowly. What if we used the show to do more? What if the laughter built something real? Not just a prize, a promise. He leaned back, thinking. His fingers tapped the table softly, in rhythm with an idea forming deep inside him. Later that day, he called Dana over. "I want to start something," he said. "A fund for kids like Diana. For families that give, even when they're the ones losing everything." Dana's eyes widened. "You mean?" He nodded. "Yeah, a scholarship, a program, something in her name. The Diana Foundation. Maybe. A place where kids learn that kindness ain't weakness, it's strength." She smiled through tears. "Steve, that's beautiful." He chuckled softly. "Nah, that's her. I'm just putting her light in motion." A few months later, the idea became reality. With help from the show's network and sponsors, the Diana Fund for Hope and Healing launched supporting displaced children, refugees, and young content creators who wanted to make a difference in their communities. When Steve announced it publicly, he did so not from a press podium, but from the Family Feud stage, the same stage where she had stood. The lights were warm and golden again. The audience waited, quiet. He cleared his throat. "Some of y'all remember a little girl who came on this stage 10 years old, from Ukraine. Her name was Diana. She didn't come here to win money. She came here to show us what love looks like when the world forgets it." He paused, his voice trembling slightly. "I made her a promise that her kindness wouldn't end when the cameras stopped. So today, We're keepin' that promise." He gestured to the big screen behind him. It lit up with the foundation's name, the Diana Fund for Hope and Healing. Steve smiled gently, tears brimming in his own eyes. "This right here, this ain't about fame or fortune or games. It's about legacy. It's about what happens when one small heart reminds us what humanity still sounds like." A short video played clips of children in refugee shelters, receiving food, smiling, drawing. Then, footage of Diana herself, recorded back home. She stood in front of a playground, wearing the golden heart pendant Steve had given her, waving at the camera. "Thank you, Mr. Harvey," her small voice said through the speakers. "Now, we can help more children smile. Together." The crowd fell silent. The studio lights dimmed just slightly, warm and cinematic, soft as a prayer. Steve looked up at the screen, his voice quiet but steady. "You see that? That's how you change the world. Not with power, not with money, but with love." He pressed his hand to his chest, closing his eyes for a second. When he opened them, his gaze was glassy but proud. "She taught me something I'll never forget," he continued. "Sometimes, you don't need to shout to be heard. Sometimes, the smallest voice carries the loudest truth." He looked directly into the camera, speaking now not just to the audience in front of him, but to the millions who would one day watch this episode online, maybe years later, maybe in another country, maybe when they, too, needed hope. "Wherever you are," he said softly, "if you got a gift, no matter how small, use it. 'Cause somewhere out there, somebody's waiting on your kindness to survive another day." For a moment, no one breathed. Then applause filled the air, not thunderous, but warm, human, pure. When the lights faded and the episode ended, Steve stayed behind again, alone, under the glow of the stage. He looked up, smiled faintly, and whispered, "You did it, baby girl. You turned your pain into light." Outside, the night sky hung still over Atlanta, but inside that studio, something eternal had been set in motion, a ripple of kindness stretching farther than any camera could see. If this story touched your heart, don't just leave quietly, tell us in the comments below. What part of this story stayed with you the most? Was it a word, a moment, or something it reminded you of in your own life? We read every single message because your stories keep this space alive. And if you believe the world still needs moments like this, hit subscribe, join our family, and help us keep remembering the stories that deserve to be told. This is Stories Left Behind, where human stories are never lost, and where your story might be the next one we tell.